Sometimes I like to imagine how it is to play a Soulsborne game with zero knowledge going in, exploring these vast worlds for the first time with no guides and no expectations. Would that type of player be able to experience everything, or would some aspects of the game remain hidden? What about bosses, for example, as today's video is going to focus on the bosses I consider the most well hidden in the Soulsborne series from that perspective. We're going game to game, starting with... Technically, every single boss in Demon Souls is on the main progression path. To beat the game, you have to slay all 5 archdemons from the 5 archstones, leaving us with nothing to talk about. Or so you might think. I'm kind of bending the rules a tiny bit, but I consider the encounter with Old King Duran in 1-1 to be an NPC battle worthy of a boss health bar, and the rewards are staggeringly important. Old King Duran is interesting because you must fight him to claim the sword Demon Brand, which can be fused with Soul Brand to create the Northern Regalia, a weapon that gains power in pure white and black character tendency, and which carried me through the final part of my Demon Souls 100% run. Link to that video is on screen now. Most players, however, won't end up fighting or finding him on their first playthrough, as in order to access the mausoleum he rests in, you need to first interact with the NPC Ostrava of Boletaria. He holds the mausoleum key item needed to unlock Duran's chamber, and on a blind first playthrough, most players will get this key from Ostrava in 1-4, the King's Tower, by talking to him on the stairs before the Old King Alant fight. You get this mysterious key, but then you immediately take on your final archdemon. Your focus is entirely on Alant. You defeat him, return to the Nexus, and if he really was your final archdemon, you're suddenly thrust into a cutscene with the Maiden in Black, all because you likely wanted to use the souls you just got to level up. Then you're below the Nexus, and at that point most players will just follow the story, killing True King Alant and activating one of the game's 2 endings, immediately throwing you into New Game Plus and completely missing Old King Duran's encounter. You have to flee below the Nexus before triggering the final boss, head to 1-1, and kill a Red-Eye Knight down a side path of the Western Battlement, then unlock the door with the key to face Duran. He may not have a boss health bar, but oh my god, with requirements like that, he definitely qualifies for this list. For Dark Souls, we're going to see a little bit of crossover with a video I made earlier this year about Soulsborne God dang it moments, as the bosses of Dark Souls I'd consider the most hidden are also those locked behind moments I talked about in that video. First up, we have the Stray Demon, who can only be fought after returning to the Northern Undead Asylum where you started your journey. To do this, you have to step off the elevator between Firelink Shrine and the Undead Parish, then complete a tricky platforming jump to reach the large tower. You then climb said tower until you reach a nest where you're asked to curl up into a ball, and this will then take you back to the Undead Asylum, where you'll likely find the Stray Demon encounter no problem. I'm not sure how tuned in new players would be to some of Dark Souls' more platform-heavy secrets. I wouldn't be shocked if many first-timers with no guides never found their way back to the asylum, which also leads into our next boss, Crossbreed Priscilla. She lives in the painted world of Ariamis, found within a giant painting in the lower hall of Anor Londo. The only way to enter the painting, though, is to have the peculiar doll item in your inventory, which can only be obtained from your starting cell in the Undead Asylum. So you'd have to grab the doll on your return visit, which we just went over, read the description to see the words Painted World, and then remember there is a giant painting in one of the rooms in Anor Londo. It's a bit of a stretch, one I think a lot of players missed on their first go around, very well hidden. Sticking to Anor Londo, how about Dark Sun Gwyndolin? In order to access his fog gate, you have 2 options, both of which I don't see someone doing on their first playthrough without a guide. One, you can find the Dark Moon Seance Ring hidden in the catacombs. Then, after going to the Dark Moon Tomb in Anor Londo, which can be found on the lowest level of the giant staircase elevator, you can put on the ring to dispel the statue of Gwyn, allowing you to either join the Blade of the Dark Moon Covenant or step through the fog to face Gwyndolin. Or 2, you can attack Guinevere at the end of Anor Londo, causing her to vanish, revealing that the entire city is under the illusion of Gwyndolin. This also dispels the statue in the Darkmoon tomb, though to reach it you will have to fight through some of Gwyndolin's followers and Anor Londo's Firekeeper first. The only way a player would figure this out is actually by combining these two options together, as the Darkmoon Seance Ring's flavor text you get in your first option reveals that Gwyndolin is the only deity in Anor Londo, which could potentially lead a player to our second option, because if he's the only deity, who is Guinevere? But the likelihood of a regular player realizing all of this is insanely low. We're going to move on from Dark Souls for now, but just a shout out to the DLC bosses who are locked behind the very convoluted DLC access point, but you can watch my Guide Dang It video for more info on that specific chain of events. Aside from Elden Ring, Dark Souls 2 has the largest boss roster in the series, so I'm quite impressed to see that a vast majority of these encounters are either on the game's main path, or not quite obtuse enough to truly land in this video. The closest honourable mentions came in the form of the 3 DLC's optional side bosses. For Shulva, you have the Gank Squad found in Cave of the Dead, which can only be accessed by opening a door at the start of the Dragon Sanctum. The key is found in a large room further into the complex, and by the time you find it, you'll probably have forgotten about that initial doorway. But still, that's nothing compared to what we talked about in our previous entry. Similarly, Lud and Zalin are found in the Frigid Outskirts, but the key to access their area is only found in post-thawed Elium Lois, in a cavern with a flexile sentry guarding it that you can only find by going down paths you've already explored now that the ice has melted and the snowstorm has subsided. And Sorolon is locked behind a memory you can only access from the Room and Broom Tower containing his armor, but it's not explained in-game that the only way to activate his memory is to first defeat the Fume Knight in the depths of the dungeon. But some players will kill Fume Knight, see they got their crown reward, and think, on to the next DLC, missing him entirely. The problem though is that all 3 of those examples are related to their respective DLCs and nothing more. No, for Dark Souls 2, I think we need a boss fight that requires a lot more exploration between different areas to really add to this list. Enter Dark Lurker. I would bet that aside from the Demon Souls roster, Dark Lurker might just be one of the least fought major bosses in the entire series. This is because his encounter is locked behind the Pilgrims of the Dark Covenant questline, which requires the player to find Dark Diver Grandal in 3 separate locations across Drangleic. One is in the Shaded Woods, you drop down a specific hole which lands you on the platform with the NPC. One is in the Black Gulch, you drop down the cliffs near the second bonfire, where you'll find a door that cannot be opened without the Forgotten Key. This key can be obtained by slaying the nearby giants in a lower cavern, and once the door is open, he's sitting behind it. His final location is beneath Drangleic Castle, behind the far left door of the basement room, where you use the souls of your enemies to unlock a series of doorways. You'll fall through a hole and find him and a bonfire nearby. His questline involves you needing to talk to him at each location, then use a humanity to enter the Great Chasm of Old, 3 mini-dungeons where you must light a large torch, and then kill all the enemies within to escape. After completing your 3rd dungeon, you'll then be forced into the Dark Lurker battle, and any subsequent attempts will also throw you into the Dark Lurker battle upon completion of the mini-dungeon. A boss that requires multiple locations to access, a primary resource to access, mind you, and that's just for the chance of fighting Dark Lurker, as you could die to the many enemies in the mini-dungeons themselves. This is the textbook definition of a hidden encounter. Editing Billy here. Yeah, I completely forgot about Aldia, Scholar of the First Sin. Hidden boss fight. Secret boss fight. But you know what? I didn't want to include final bosses on this list, even if they're secret, because they just feel a little different, you know? They feel like they're their own thing. But if you feel I should have included Aldia, fuck. I probably should have. Moving on. I don't think it's a surprise that there are some dark, twisted creatures to face in Bloodborne. Of course it's going to have a handful of hidden encounters. And how fitting that our first pick is the Amygdala, a creature known for being hidden until you have enough insight to see them. They're found at the end of the Nightmare Frontier, with the challenge being how to access that area. After entering the Forbidden Woods for the first time, every Red Lantern NPC location will have their regular dialogue replaced by Patches the Spider. He waxes poetic and gives you a tonsil stone, urging you to step lightly round to the right of the Great Cathedral and seek an ancient, shrouded church. This corresponds to the area just before the closed-off doorway that eventually takes you to Yaha Ghul, and here you can be picked up by a lesser Amygdala, teleporting you to the lower floor of the lecture building where you can access the Nightmare Frontier. This is a little more telegraphed than some of the hidden bosses we've seen so far though, and later in the game you'll appear in the upper lecture hall as part of the main story, where you can then take a ladder down to the room with Patches, allowing you to unlock that door and access the lower lecture hall without doing the Tonsil Stone events. Going back to the Forbidden Woods though, there is a hidden boss that hinges on how well you explore the village in the first half, Martyr Logarius. Because you can find a poison cavern beneath the forest that, if you run through, will take you to a large series of ladders that drop you off at Yosefka's clinic in central Yharnam. Once inside, if you go to the room where you started the game, you'll find the Canehurst Summons, which explains that the stagecoach leaves from Hemwick Crossing. This is a hint telling you to go to Hemwick Charnel Lane, where if you head to the road before the Witch's Abode, you'll be able to take a coach to the hidden Castle Canehurst where you can explore to find the Martyr. For me though, the most hidden boss in Bloodborne easily goes to Abriatus, Daughter of the Cosmos. She's not just a hidden boss for the player, but in-universe as well, one of the church's darkest secrets. To access her fight, you first need to find a way into the upper cathedral ward. The door to the ward is locked, meaning you need to find the key, which can be found off the side of a drop-off point in the middle of Yaha Ghul, the unseen village. It's tough to collect because the area is filled with respawning enemies and amygdala lasers. Then you have to remember the locked doorway behind a room filled with pots at the end of the church workshop, an area that can only be accessed, by the way, if you beat Old Yharnam and kill the blood-starved beast, as the doorway in Erden Chapel leading up to the workshop will only unlock after the beast is dead. Most players do this, but there are a handful who will instead buy the church emblem from the shop to skip doing Old Yharnam, leaving them at a disadvantage. Once in the upper cathedral ward, you complete the area as normal, facing off against the Celestial Emissary boss. They also would technically count for this list as well, but most players will beat them and think, that's the end of the area, let's go. Abriatus though is past one more layer, as you then need to shatter this window to drop down into the Grand Cathedral, where you can then find the elevator leading down to the Altar of Despair and Abriatus. Good luck figuring out that window is breakable when there's no breakable glass anywhere else in the game. Hey, before we get into Dark Souls 3, just want to let you guys know we're trying to reach 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year. If you guys want to help support the channel, maybe consider parrying that subscribe button. It would really mean the world. It genuinely helps. And if you're watching this as it goes out, consider hyping and liking the video too. Thanks for watching. On to Dark Souls 3. Due to its inherent linearity, Dark Souls 3 doesn't have a lot of hidden boss fights that fit a list like this. It has optional fights, sure, but most of them are very simple to access. The Old Demon King is found in Smouldering Lake, with the only challenge being that the player needs to know they can climb down the broken rope bridge at the end of the Catacombs of Carthus. The same then applies to the Champions Gravetender and Great Wolf in the Painted World of Ariandel, as their arena is also accessed via a broken wooden bridge, and once you've experienced the one in the base game, you'll catch on very quickly to the trick here as well. Osiros, the Consumed King, and Champion Gundyr are both optional boss fights, but the former's area is quite simple to discover after climbing out of the Dancer's Arena, while the latter is one illusory wall away after beating Osiros. However, there are two bosses that do fit today's list, those being the Ancient Wyvern and the Nameless King, because getting to Archdragon Peak is quite the puzzle. Firstly, you need to defeat the Dancer at the Boreal Valley. This can be done early game or late game depending on how you feel about Emma. Once defeated, you then have to go through the Consumed King's Garden and defeat Osiros the Consumed King, who we mentioned earlier. After beating him, you head through the hallway beyond until you reach a room containing the Path of the Dragon gesture. If you're a new player, you might assume the reward for the boss fight is just a cute gesture and that's it. But instead, the gesture becomes a key, something FromSoft began experimenting with in Bloodborne with small instances of gestures helping you to get items, but from Dark Souls 3 onwards, they had the potential to be bigger. You then have to make your way to Irithyll Dungeon and take the shortcut from the top level leading down to the Jailer Roller Disco. This takes you past this platform where you can see some petrified statues performing the Path of the Dragon gesture. From there, use the gesture yourself and you'll be warped to Archdragon Peak to face the base game's worst boss and one of the base game's best bosses. Some players won't even have unlocked the shortcut here, just rushing through the jailers for the profaned capital, and it takes a very observant person to even remember these oddly posed creatures along the way. We take this stuff for granted, but man, I would not have figured this out on my own back in the day. Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is another game where a majority of the bosses lie on the progression path, and most encounters are found throughout the various areas without much in the way of hidden difficult fights, though I will have to mention the rematch against the Guardian Ape. For those that don't know, if you kill the Guardian Ape boss, it will reappear in the den after the Poison Swamp in the Ashina Depths, where you can fight it and its bride for a second time. However, this part of the game allows you to do the two major areas in either order, those being the Sunken Valley or Mibu Village. So if you do Mibu Village first, you'll come through this area long before the Guardian Ape does, so you won't even think about coming back to the depths and you'll completely miss the fight. It's not a hidden boss, but the way it's structured does mean some people will have no idea it even exists. But lucky for us, there is one proper hidden boss in this game, and no, it's not the Demon of Hatred that's as simple as going back through the Ashina outskirts, come on people, it's Owl Father. He is found in a special variant of the Hirata Estate Memories that can only be visited if you have the Father's Bell Charm, and you've completed the initial variant of the Hirata Estate Memory by defeating Lady Butterfly. But the checklist of tiny interactions needed to get the Bell Charm is pretty obtuse. Firstly, you have to beat Great Shinobi Owl atop Ashina Castle. Then you need to activate the incense burner in Kuro's room by following the story. From here, the main path as you go to Mibu Village so you can get transported to Fountainhead Palace, but no silly, if you want to face Father Owl, you have to instead sneak behind the walls of Kuro's room so that you can eavesdrop on your charge. Then you talk to Emma twice, resting at the sculptor's idol for each talk, and she'll eventually relocate to a grave behind the castle, though she is nice enough to leave a note for that one. Afterwards, she'll visit the dilapidated temple, and you have to eavesdrop on her and the sculptor's conversation. Finally, confront her afterwards to get the Bell Charm, complete the Hirata Estate revisit and its awful rematch against Juzo the Drunkard, and you finally get to face off against one of the best bosses in the game. You can make a clear argument that being a shinobi is all about eavesdropping and overhearing conversations, collecting information, which is exactly what we do to access Owl Father, but I also know that when you're playing a game, it is easy to get tunnel visioned on a specific path, and for Sekiro, that means completely forgetting the eavesdrop feature even exists by the late game. It is so tempting to just say most of the bosses in Elden Ring are hidden, because there are so many that most players won't ever face them all. But that is also an extremely big cop-out. I have thought of a handful of bosses that I consider extremely well hidden though, especially with the video's premise that you're going in with no knowledge. In fact, the first two bosses I'm going to list in this section I missed on my original playthrough: Lich Dragon Fortisax and Dragonlord Placidusax. In order to fight Fortisax, you need to find Fia in the Deeproot Depths. You don't have to follow her questline for this fight either, she'll always be in her arena, ready to summon her champions to defend her, but it's reaching the Deeproot Depths in the first place that makes this boss well hidden. The easier option involves you going to Upper Shifra River, which can be accessed after the Star Scourge Radahn boss. There's a drop-off that leads to an aqueduct with 2 Crucible Knights, and a battle against the Valiant Gargoyles. It's not the hardest location to find, but I doubt everyone that played Elden Ring clocked it. Beating the boss lets you ride a coffin, which will then take you to the Deeproot Depths, where you can climb the various routes to reach Fia's arena. Alternatively, upon beating the Subterranean Shunning Grounds, an optional dungeon below Lanedell, you can dispel an illusory wall to access the parkour leading down to the 3 Fingers. In the room before the doorway, you can find an illusory wall which allows you to go even further downwards into the Deeproot Depths. From there, beat Fia's champions, interact with Fia until she goes to sleep, and then face off against Fortisax in her dreams. As for Dragonlord Placidusax, his fight doesn't have any important requirements to access it. There are no items needed to trigger the encounter, no crazy cross-region travel times. You simply have to be observant towards the end of crumbling Farum Azula. From the Grace before Malekith, head back down into the church with the Beastmen and go outside until you reach the cliff. Below, you should see a platform, and if you drop down, you'll notice more and more platforms that you can follow in a chain to reach a floating piece of debris. Then you'll be given the option to lay down, and doing so will transport you directly to the arena with Placidus Axe. No fog gate, no stake of Marika to give away the boss, you've just got to find a single hidden path that a surprising amount of players, myself included, missed on our first playthrough. And I honestly love how Placidus Axe is hidden so simply, yet so effectively. I was tempted to also include Mohg, Lord of Blood, but I decided against it. He's actively required in order to reach the DLC, and I don't think it's that hard to find your way into the consecrated snowfield where his waygate rests. The toughest part of that questline is getting the medallion half from Albus in Liurnia, but I found that by accident in my first playthrough anyway. Midro was also a consideration, as I really wanted a DLC boss represented, and that illusory wall separating the region leading to the Abyssal Woods was one I completely missed on my first run since I was playing offline. But look, one illusory wall just isn't enough protection for a hidden boss's list, especially when once you get past it, the route leading down to Midra is extremely straightforward. But I do want to throw in Meta Mother of Fingers. To access her fight, you need to complete the questline of Count Emir in the Cathedral of Manus Meta. He asks you to visit the two finger ruins found on the southern and northern points of the map. The south ruins are relatively straightforward to reach. You have to find your way down to the Cerulean Coast region, and from there you can drop onto a beach that will then take you over to the finger ruins. The north ones though, they require some work. First, you need to go to Bonnie Village and find this location containing the Oh Mother gesture. Then you need to go to the Specimen Storehouse in the Shadowkeep, taking the path from the flooded church district. This is because there's a small portion of the storehouse that you can only access from this entrance, including a hole in the wall that leads up to the area rafters. Cross them and you'll descend an elevator leading to the Commander Gaius boss fight, as well as a small chapel. And like in Dark Souls 3, if you perform the Oh Mother gesture in this chapel, the statue will slide open to reveal a path into the Hinterlands, a hidden part of the map, including the second set of finger ruins. After blowing the horns at both finger ruins, you can then return to the church, where you'll discover beneath Emir's throne is a ladder which leads directly down to the third set of finger ruins, and once activated, you'll be teleported to Meta's arena. The questline is straightforward, but getting the second set of ruins requires you to find and learn a unique gesture to access that part of the map, and that makes Meta a real hidden gem to find as a result, especially given the gesture isn't on an obvious path, it's in a side area. Anyway, I think I covered a majority of the hidden bosses across the series. If there are any that I missed though, let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, maybe have a binge of my other rankings. I have so many of them, besties. Have a good one. Adios.